begins with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that waits, breath held, as though afraid of being overheard. In an archive deep beneath Rome, where the light never fully reaches, whispers move like smoke through stone halls. They speak of a manuscript, not holy, not safe, not meant for prayer, nor even for study. A book that should not exist. The Vatican does not name it. It has no catalog number, no shelf, no trace in any official inventory. Yet the silence around it is heavier than the bells of St. Peter's. Priests, if pressed, avert their eyes. Historians searching for its trail find only fragments, scribbles in margins, erased passages, empty spaces where words used to be. And in those absences, fear grows. They say it is older than the Bible, older even than the prophets. It does not speak of God as we know him, but of other presences, vast, cold, indifferent. Entities that watched long before Sinai thundered, before Christ walked, before any scripture was written. This is why it must be hidden, because within its pages are rituals not of salvation, but of awakening. Symbols not of faith, but of memory. Memory of a time before humanity had priests or churches, when its worship bent toward stranger fires. No one admits who wrote it. Some whisper it was the work of desert mystics, wanderers who carved prayers into stone beneath stars long since shifted from their place. Others insist it was not written at all, but received, like a transmission, a dictation from something that never needed parchment or ink. A voice that left its imprint like fire leaves scars on wood. The book itself is said to be unnerving, not bound like others, but stitched with cords that tighten when handled as though resisting touch. Its cover breathes faintly with warmth, even in cold rooms. Pages that shimmer when candlelight leans too close, as if they remember being illuminated by another kind of flame. And the ink, no scholar has agreed on its nature. Some call it iron, some ash. Others swear it is blood too old to decay. When it appears in rumor, it always brings with it a warning. Do not read aloud. The words themselves carry weight. To repeat them is not to speak, but to summon. One monk, centuries ago, is said to have whispered a single line, and the monastery bell rang by itself, though no hand pulled the rope. Another claimed the manuscript contained a hymn that unravels memory. Once sung, the listener forgets their own name. But if it is so dangerous, why preserve it at all? Why not burn it, erase it, destroy it forever? That is the Vatican's greatest secret. They erase many things, whole gospels silenced, whole histories swallowed, but not this. This they lock away, deeper than bones of saints, deeper than relics of martyrs. Not to protect it from the world, but perhaps to protect the world from it. Still, rumors leak. A phrase here, a drawing there, a constellation that no longer exists in the night sky, a map of human veins shaped into the form of a ladder, a faceless figure with eyes painted all around the border, watching from the page even when it is closed. It is said the book carries its own curse. Not a story, not a myth, but an observable pattern. Everyone who has studied it too long has vanished. Some fall ill in days. Some walk into rivers and never surface. Some simply go to sleep and are never seen again. It is not a curse of punishment, but of silence. The same silence that surrounds the book itself. Imagine it. A manuscript too dangerous to name. A manuscript too sacred or too profane to destroy. It waits in shadows, between candle and stone, waiting, perhaps, for another hand to open it. What if the real danger isn't in reading it, but in remembering it? Paris, 1932. A winter of smoke, hunger, and whispered deals. In the antique quarter along Rue des Écoles, men traded relics like others traded secrets. Among them moved Renaud. His full name never survives in records. Some called him a collector, others called him a shadow chaser. His apartment overlooked the Seine, and his shelves bent under the weight of objects no museum would catalog. Ivory idols from West Africa, coins with erased faces, bones carved with scripts that blurred when stared at too long. On a gray December evening, he entered a seller's shop that smelled of dust and myrrh. The man who waited inside was no merchant. His robe was plain, his face worn, hollow-eyed, like someone who had spent too many nights awake. He introduced himself only as a keeper. From where, Renaud never asked. From when, no one could say. Wrapped in oilcloth, the keeper produced the book. Not sold, not offered, but given. His hands shook as though eager to be rid of it. He warned Renaud with words more desperate than bargaining. Never read it under the stars. Never open it in silence. And above all, do not dream while it rests near you. Renaud, proud and reckless, dismissed the words as superstition. He paid in gold coins, far more than necessary, and carried the bundle home through streets glazed with frost. His diary, recovered later by police, describes the first impression. "The weight is strange," he wrote. "Not heavy in the hand, but heavy in the mind. To hold it is to feel watched. I have the sense that it remembers who has touched it." The book bore no title, no author. Its cover was blackened leather, cracked like scorched earth, stitched with cords that pulled tighter the longer he handled them. On the inside front board, faint letters scratched in Latin, Custodi, Silere, guard, be silent. Renaud ignored the warning. Collectors do not acquire secrets to keep them sealed. One night, after wine and cigarettes, he drew open the cords. The first page shifted beneath candlelight, symbols writhing like snakes. They were not hieroglyphs, not Greek, not any known script. Some characters seemed to fold into each other endlessly, twisting until they dissolved into dizziness. Others burned with clarity, circles around circles, a star map charting skies that did not match the heavens above Paris. The second page chilled him, a figure drawn with exquisite care, human-shaped, but faceless. Around its outline, dozens of eyes stared outward, not from the figure, but from the border of the page itself. As though the paper were the watcher, not the watched. Renaud's diary ends with one line, written in haste, ink smeared. "The book opens me, not the other way around." Neighbors recalled strange noises that week, knocking on walls where no one stood, the hiss of chanting from an empty room. Then silence. Renaud was last seen leaving his apartment at midnight, coat unbuttoned, walking toward the river. He never returned. Days later, when police forced open his door, they found the apartment ransacked. No valuables taken, only the book missing. On the table, a black feather lay beside his wine glass. No bird had flown there, no explanation offered. And so the manuscript slipped into darkness again. For the Vatican, this was not disappearance, it was retrieval. For the world, it was another story erased. But objects like these do not vanish. They wait. They move like shadows, carried by hands unseen, resurfacing where a fear still lingers. Renaud had been warned. Never open it under the stars. No one ever explained why. Perhaps he did. Perhaps, on that last night by the river, the manuscript was not the only thing that opened. The book does not open easily. Its cords resist, as if memory itself does not wish to be disturbed. But Renaud was not a man who lived by hesitation. He He had spent years prying open locked chests, bribing monks in back alleys, chasing rumors across borders that had only just stopped burning from war. To him, resistance was an invitation. The first night he unbound the manuscript, he sat alone, curtains drawn, a single candle flickering. His diary describes the sensation. The air thickens. The room seems to lean. My reflection in the glass loses its edges. The first page was a storm of symbols, not words, not drawings, but something in between. Coiling lines that moved when the eye tried to follow them. Circles nested inside one another, like doors opening into other doors. He traced them with a fingertip and felt his pulse stutter, as if the ink itself vibrated with a rhythm older than his own blood. Then came the star map. Dots connected by thin red lines, precise and deliberate. Yet when he compared it to charts of the Paris Observatory, nothing aligned. Entire constellations were absent. Others appeared doubled. And one, an immense wheel of light, stood in a place where the sky, at least above Europe, was empty. A map of what sky? Renaud scrolled in the margin. What year? The third page unsettled him more deeply. A human figure, tall, proportioned, but faceless. No eyes, no mouth, no skin. Around its frame, a border of tiny eyes stared outward. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. Eyes that seemed drawn not with ink, but with focus. They carried weight, awareness, presence. Renaud swore they shifted when the candle flickered, following his hand as it turned the page. Further on, shapes that should not exist. Architecture of temples built in impossible angles. Arches folding inward as if space itself bent wrong. Stairs that climbed into nothing. Columns that ended before they began. Temples of void, he noted, before blotting the ink with an impatient thumb. One drawing chilled him so deeply, he closed the book for a week. It showed a face, or the absence of one. An oval of emptiness, surrounded by ink-black sockets, deep and hollow, staring straight from the page. No features, no expression, only vacancy that seemed to pull him closer the longer he looked. He dreamed of it that night. In the dream, the oval did not stay flat. It reached. Neighbors remember that week. They heard scratching on his floorboards at odd hours, as though someone dragged nails across wood. A maid reported a stench of iron, sharp and metallic, when she entered to collect laundry. Renaud stopped answering knocks, except once, when his voice snapped through the door. "I am not alone." Then, silence. The last entry in his diary is barely legible, written as though his hand trembled. The book is not read. The book reads. No one saw him again. The apartment remained locked. When opened days later, the candle was burned to its base. Wax hardened across the table. The book was gone. On the floor, near the door, chalk lines marked a circle. At its center, only ash. Renaud's name faded from record, but the manuscript did not. 10 years later, it surfaced again. This time, far from Paris, in the desert where silence has teeth. 10 years pass. Europe is torn apart by fire and steel. Names vanish into lists of the dead, into smoke over cities, into silence where whole libraries once stood. And yet, in 1942, a whisper surfaces. Not in Paris, not in Rome, but in the Egyptian desert, where monasteries cling to stone cliffs as if time itself forgot them. The monastery at Deir al-Byzantine had lived centuries unnoticed. Coptic monks kept their chants in narrow halls, lit their lamps with oil pressed from olives that grew against all reason in the sand. They knew war moved across the world, but in their cloisters, silence still reigned. Until the night one monk, sorting through a forgotten storeroom, found a wrapped bundle beneath broken icons and rotted wood. It was the manuscript, bound still by its cords, no title, no name. The same warmth, faint and unsettling, breathing through the leather. The monk carried it to his abbot, who, after a single glance, ordered it locked. Yet monks are men, and men are curious. Whispers moved from one to another. A book that hums when touched, a book that remembers who opens it. Then came the visitors. They did not arrive as pilgrims. No prayers on their lips, no gifts of bread or wine. They came cloaked in gray, carrying sealed orders, Vatican envoys. Their silence weighed heavier than any sermon. They asked for nothing. They demanded nothing. They simply walked to the storeroom, placed the bundle into a chest, and departed before dawn. When the chest was opened days later in a secure Roman vault, the manuscript lay inside. But something else remained in the monastery. On the table where it had rested, a feather, black, sleek, unburnt, though no raven, no crow, no bird of any kind nested there. The monks spoke of it only once to a visitor years later. They said the air grew cold after the envoys left, as though the absence of the book had carved a hollow in their halls. Dreams haunted them. Dreams of faceless figures standing at the edge of the desert, waiting, eyes glimmering along their skin like jewels. Why had the manuscript traveled from Paris to Egypt? Who carried it? No one confesses. Records vanish. Renaud's name does not appear in any Vatican archive, nor in any Paris police report. But in Rome, behind guarded doors, the manuscript's presence is noted again. And with it, the mark of those who retrieved it, the black feather always left behind. The Vatican does not destroy such things. They never do. Fire consumes, but fire also reveals. Ash can be sifted, reconstructed. What is burned may still be remembered. To them, secrecy is stronger than flame. Silence lasts longer than smoke. And so the book waits once more, this time under the shadow of St. Peter's dome, this time in halls where even bishops do not walk without permission. But the desert remembers, the monks dream, and stories slip through, carried on winds that do not forget. What if the book is not merely carried from place to place, but finds its way? What if it does not belong to the keepers, but to itself? The desert does not give easily, yet it keeps everything. What is buried beneath its sands is not lost. It is waiting. In 1947, 5 years after the manuscript reappeared in Deir al-Byzantine, an archaeological team working near another Coptic monastery stumbled upon something the church had tried to forget. It began with a collapse. A stone floor cracked beneath a novice's feet, revealing a hollow chamber below. Lanterns lowered into the gap revealed not a crypt of saints, but a tomb untouched by prayer. The air that drifted upward smelled of resin and iron, as if centuries had not erased the presence of burning. The team descended. What they found did not resemble Christian burial. Along the walls stood tall mirrors, framed in obsidian. Yet when they leaned forward, their own reflections refused to appear. The glass drank light without giving any back. One archaeologist pressed his palm against the surface, and though it felt smooth, he swore it was neither warm nor cold, but hungry. In the center of the chamber lay staffs, twisted into serpentine coils, their tips forked like tongues. Nearby, fragments of scrolls lay sealed in jars of bitumen. When the jars were cracked open, the scrolls revealed symbols unmistakably linked to the forbidden manuscript. Circles, ladders, faceless forms, constellations that no sky now bears. At first, the team rejoiced. Discovery meant prestige, and prestige meant funding. but their triumph curdled. The youngest member, a student barely 20, began to mutter in his sleep, phrases in no known tongue, yet recorded by others with unsettling accuracy. Another awoke screaming, clutching his face, swearing that the black mirrors had followed him into his dreams. One scholar, Professor Halberd, known for his skepticism, laughed at their fears. He copied the symbols onto paper and announced plans to publish. That night, he vanished. His tent unzipped, his bedroll cold, his boots gone. Only a black feather lay where his head had rested. Word spread quickly. The Vatican moved faster. A closed carriage arrived before dawn, bearing men who spoke little and wore no insignia. They did not argue, did not bribe, did not threaten. They simply gathered the scroll fragments, inspected the mirrors, and nailed shut the chamber. By the following week, a plaster wall sealed the entrance as though no tomb had ever existed. The archaeologists returned home. Some left the field altogether, whispering of dreams that gnawed them awake each night. One, a woman named Dr. Salma, wrote in her journal, "I still see the faceless figure standing at the edge of my bed. It is waiting for me to forget my own name." Months later, she drowned herself in the Nile. The Vatican's record of the incident is never shown. But among whispers, one detail persists. The scrolls from the tomb and the manuscript in Rome were written by the same hand, or perhaps not by a hand at all. A monastery above, a tomb below. One for prayers, one for silence. And between them, a truth sealed in stone. The desert keeps everything. What the church erases, the sand remembers. And memory, once unearthed, does not always return quietly to the dark. The Vatican's archivists are not unlearned men. They speak the tongues of prophets and conquerors alike. Latin, Greek, Coptic, Hebrew. Some trace root words backward through Sumer into Akkad, until even clay tablets run dry. But when they turned their eyes upon the forbidden manuscript, language itself betrayed them. The script is not one tongue, but many, and none. Curves echo Egyptian hieroglyphs, yet refuse to form images. Spirals resemble Greek letters, but fold back on themselves, refusing meaning. Some symbols appear mirrored, written backwards, as if taunting the reader to pursue sense where sense is forbidden. Others loop endlessly, ink curling into itself like a snake swallowing its tail. To read too long is to feel the ground tilt, the letters becoming less like words and more like traps. One scholar, Father Della Croce, insisted he could classify it. He called it Proto-Atlantean, though the Vatican forbade the name. He noted how the pages shifted depending on the order of reading. Some were written top to bottom, others spiraled inward, forcing the eye to follow until dizziness struck. He wrote, "This is not a language of communication. It is a language of erasure. Each word I understand makes me forget another." Weeks later, he collapsed mid-sermon, unable to remember the Lord's Prayer. His final breath carried only one word: ash. Others tried different methods. Mirrors placed over the pages to catch meaning from reversed text, sounding out the shapes aloud as if they were music. But those who dared to speak the words never finished their readings. Their throats closed, their voices broke into silence. One monk clawed his own tongue until he bled, desperate to stop the syllables from escaping. Drawings interlace with the script. Not illustrations, not decoration, but something else. Temples that fold into impossible geometry, staircases climbing into void, diagrams of the heavens that map stars long vanished. And always the faceless forms. Bodies shaped like men, but hollow. Skin filled with nothing. Faces erased, yet their empty sockets stare directly into the reader's gaze. It is said the manuscript contains no punctuation, no beginning, no end. To read a page is to fall into a circle, to repeat until exhaustion claims the mind. One translator, a woman named Zara, kept her notes hidden. Before she vanished, she wrote in hurried lines, "The book is not meant to be read. It is meant to be remembered. But to remember, it is to forget yourself." That phrase lingers still. What kind of language does not preserve memory, but devours it? What alphabet is shaped not to reveal truth, but to bury it? The Vatican called the script lingua exquidi, the language of erasure. They locked it away, refusing to let even their most trusted scholars study more than fragments at a time. Too much exposure, they feared, would unravel not just the reader, but the church itself. For if language builds our memory, then a language designed to unmake memory is not merely forbidden, it is weapon. And weapons once forged never stay buried. It is one thing to find a forbidden manuscript. It is another to survive it. The Vatican does not speak of those who tried, but their traces remain, like ashes clinging to a wind that refuses to scatter. The first was Father Della Croce, who believed he could tame the language. His notebooks filled with diagrams, arrows pointing from one symbol to another. He wrote of rhythms, beats hidden within the script, like drum patterns carved into silence. For weeks, his colleagues admired his dedication. Then, one Sunday, in the middle of Mass, he forgot the name of Christ. His tongue faltered, his eyes clouded, his hands trembled over the chalice. Within hours, he was dead, body intact, mind already erased. Another scholar, Zara, worked in Cairo, away from Vatican eyes. She had stolen a fragment on thin parchment, carried it folded against her heart. Her notes show desperation, as if she feared forgetting even as she wrote. The words coil around me. They sing when I close my eyes. My veins hum. She vanished in her apartment one night, door locked from inside. On the wall, in her own blood, she had drawn a single symbol. Those who saw it swore the lines kept moving for hours after her body was carried away. Then there was Professor Halberd, the skeptic who laughed at curses. He traced the diagrams with careful ink, claiming them to be pre-Sumerian star charts. His students recall his last lecture, where he suddenly stopped mid-sentence, staring at the blackboard as though it were staring back. The next morning, his tent was empty, his belongings untouched. Only a black feather rested on his notes. And Renaud, the first collector, whose diary ended in frantic scrawl, "The book reads me." No grave marks his name. His disappearance remains unsolved. Each death, each vanishing, follows the same pattern. Silence. No screams, no struggle, no sound. Just absence. As if the book's curse is not pain, but removal. To study it is not to be punished, but to be erased, like words scraped from parchment, leaving only a faint shadow of ink. Warnings do exist. At the bottom of one page, faintly visible under magnification, lies a phrase written in a hand not matching the rest. Nolit excitare illud. Do not wake it. But what is it? The text does not say. The absence is more terrifying than an answer. Some whisper the manuscript was designed as a trap, a net woven from words, meant to catch not the eye, but the mind. To open it is to invite something not written on the page, but waiting between the lines. One Vatican archivist, when asked if the book truly killed its readers, replied with only this: not killed, claimed. And so the manuscript claims another and another. Scholars vanish, translators bleed symbols onto walls, priests lose the names of their own God. The church locks it deeper, but still, the pattern repeats. Knowledge has always carried a price. But what if the price here is not understanding, but existence itself? They move without banners. No crests, no colors. No one records their names. Within Vatican corridors, they are known only in whispers. Custodes silenti, the silent custodians, the ones who appear when words become too dangerous to exist. The order's origin is unspoken, but fragments suggest it began in the 16th century, when heresies multiplied like wildfire and new worlds revealed scriptures older than Genesis. While theologians debated, another group was trained, not to argue, but to erase. Their methods are simple. They arrive at night. They take the text. They leave no violence, no spectacle, only absence. A gap where words once lived, a black feather where a body once slept. The feather is their only mark, smooth, gleaming, not of any bird known to naturalists. It does not burn. It does not rot. To find one is to know a memory has been erased. Renault's disappearance carried such a feather. So did the tent of Professor Halberd, and the Egyptian monastery where the manuscript resurfaced found one lying silent on its table after the envoys departed. Always the same sign, always the same silence. No testimony survives from a member of the Custodians, yet stories seep through cracks in secrecy. A Jesuit once hinted, after too much wine, that the Custodians are not trained like soldiers, but shaped like shadows. Their lives stripped of family, history, even name, until only the task remains. To them, texts are not books, but contagions, and contagions must be cut out before they spread. Their archives are said to rest beneath the archivum secretum, the vault already hidden from the world. Below even that, in rooms unlit by candles, sealed in lead and iron. Only the Custodians descend there. Only they carry the keys. The manuscript is not their only prize. Whispers speak of scrolls describing the bones of angels, tablets etched with the voice of Babel before the fall, fragments of Gospels where Christ speaks words no pulpit has ever dared repeat. All erased, all silenced, all kept in shadows, says so deep even history forgets. Yet erasure does not mean destruction. The custodes do not burn, they do not shred. They preserve what they silence, keeping danger alive, but buried. To them, secrecy is the truest form of control. Some ask, are they protectors or wardens? Do they guard humanity from truths too heavy to bear? Or do they guard the church from truths that would unmake its throne? The question is never answered. The feather falls. The silence deepens. And the manuscript is theirs again. It is said the Custodians never read what they retrieve. They dare not. But perhaps they do not need to. Perhaps, like the manuscript itself, they are written in silence. Perhaps they too are not meant to be remembered. If silence has servants, these are they. And wherever forbidden words emerge, they will follow. Not with swords, but with absence. Not with fire, but with forgetting. To open the manuscript is to open a door, not outward, but inward. Scholars who dared record its contents agreed on only one thing. What lies inside does not resemble scripture, history, or myth. It resembles instruction. Rituals written not for worshippers, but for practitioners. The first ritual is described as lux mutata, the transformation of light. Circles drawn with precise symbols bend candle flames, stretching shadows across walls in ways that ignore the body that casts them. One witness claimed to see his own shadow detach for a moment, moving independently before snapping back into place. Another set of pages describes the fractio tenebrae, the freezing of darkness. Ink diagrams show bowls of oil reflecting starlight, with inscriptions whispered over the surface. The darkness, it says, becomes solid, a barrier against intrusion. One line, nearly illegible, warns, "Do not remain inside longer than the breath of 7 hearts." A sequence of drawings maps the human body in unfamiliar ways, not by muscles or bones, but by currents of fire, by rivers of unseen force. The diagram resembles both Egyptian depictions of the soul, the Ka, and modern renderings of the human brain. Each pathway mirrors the other, as though ancient priests already charted neurons long before microscopes existed. The most disturbing section bears the title Scala Lucis, the ladder of light. 7 rungs, 7 ascents, each marked by a faceless figure stepping upward. The margin warns, each rung is memory. To climb is to lose. The final drawing shows an empty outline reaching into nothing, as if illumination requires disappearance. And scattered throughout are invocations to entities unnamed by any other text. The keepers of the lightless flame, a sect predating even the pharaohs, said to guard fire that burns without light, warmth that consumes but does not glow. To invoke them is to step outside time. To join them is to forget the sun. The Vatican scholars who studied these passages wrote with restraint, yet fear leaked into their notes. One wrote, "This is not religion, it is mechanism. Not devotion, but technology disguised as prayer." Another wrote only one phrase before resigning. They knew too much. Yet the manuscript holds more than rituals. Between its pages are star maps aligned to no modern sky, temples drawn in geometries that make the eyes ache, songs written in spirals, forcing the reader's voice into tones never sung by human throat. And always, in the margins, the faceless figure returns, sometimes alone, sometimes multiplied into dozens, their hollow outlines bending toward the reader. One page shows them with hands extended, palms open, as if offering or asking. The manuscript is not a story to be told. It is a manual to be enacted. And to enact it is to invite something into the world. Perhaps this is why the Vatican keeps it hidden. Not destroyed, not forgotten, but locked away. For some doors, once opened, do not close again. The Vatican rarely admits origins. It prefers to veil. But in the margins of the forbidden manuscript, echoes of another land sing through the silence. Egypt, the Nile, the desert, the tombs carved into cliffs long before Christ. Scholars who dared compare the manuscript with ancient papyri noticed parallels too sharp to ignore. The tall headpieces of bishops, called mitres, resemble the crowns of pharaohs, twin peaks echoing the dual kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Eucharist, bread and wine, lifted as holy flesh and blood, finds its shadow in Nile rituals where priests poured red beer for Hathor, calling it the blood of the goddess herself. Even baptism, the sacrament of water, mirrors the Egyptian washing of the dead, purification before the soul's journey. One ritual described in the manuscript is called velum magnum, the great shroud. Drawings show bodies wrapped in linen, not for burial, but for rebirth. Priests in the text chant over them, pouring water, oil, and wine as they call on faceless figures to grant new memory. The Vatican's archivists sealed these pages quickly, but a whisper escaped. Was the Eucharist once a Nile feast, renamed to cloak its source? There is more. The chalice, emblem of Christ's blood, appears in the manuscript as the cup of Ra, filled not with wine, but with black liquid drawn from the Nile at night, meant to mirror the heavens. When lifted, it was said the drinker would see the stars through the surface, as though consuming the sky itself. Even the cross, symbol of salvation, finds its echo in Egyptian hieroglyphs. The Ankh, looped cross of life, appears repeatedly in the margins of the manuscript, twisted, darkened, sometimes inverted. One Vatican reader confessed, "Our symbol is not original, it is inheritance, transfigured but not erased." This parallel is dangerous. For if Christianity's most sacred rites are shadows of older fire, then the manuscript does not merely record forgotten rituals. It reveals their theft. It implies that the Church's holiest mysteries are not divine revelations but translations, rebrandings of Egyptian magic into Christian liturgy. The Vatican fears this echo, not because it weakens faith, but because it questions memory. How many sacraments are borrowed? How much of what we call sacred is only renamed? And still, the manuscript presses deeper. Its faceless figures do not kneel at altars, but stand over pools of black water, raising staffs twisted like serpents. Its diagrams show ladders of light, stretching through star maps frozen at dates far older than Moses. It implies that Egypt itself inherited these rites from something earlier, something pre-dynastic, something that walked before pharaohs built their tombs. To read it is to ask a forbidden question. What if Christianity's roots lie not in the heavens, but in the sands of forgotten Nile temples? There are pages in the manuscript that Vatican scribes copied only once, then sealed in lead, as though repetition itself might awaken them. These pages speak not of prayer, nor of sacraments, but of tools, ritual instruments that twist memory and truth alike. The first is the speculum Rai, the mirror of Ra. Drawn as a round disc framed in black stone, it is said to reveal not the face, but the truth beneath the face. Accounts whisper of those who gazed into such mirrors found in desert tombs, seeing not their reflection, but something monstrous, familiar, and inescapable. Some reported their eyes multiplied across their skin. Others saw their mouths sewn shut. One monk, after describing the vision, clawed at his own cheeks until nothing remained but silence. The second object is darker still. Columna oblivionis, the pillar of oblivion. A tall stone shaft carved with spirals that tighten the longer one looks. The manuscript claims it does not erase an individual's memory, but entire histories. One ritual describes a circle of figures chanting as they pressed hands against the pillar, and when the chant ended, whole tribes could no longer recall their own names. A margin note, faded and hurried, reads, "So we forgot the first fire." Another passage details a practice known only as audire ossa, hearing the bones. A skull placed upon the pillar would speak in whispers of the past, voices of the dead carried through marrow like an instrument. But the cost was high. Each listener reported losing part of their own voice until their words cracked into whispers, indistinguishable from the dead than they heard. For the Vatican, these descriptions carried unbearable implications. If true, then memory is not natural. It is fragile, mutable, vulnerable to theft. And if memory can be stolen, then history is not what happened, but what remained after the stealing. Some feared that the manuscript itself was one such pillar, not merely describing erasure, but enacting it. A book whose very language consumes the reader's memory, erasing even the act of reading, until only fragments survive in the margins of sanity. This is why the Custodes Silenti moved with such urgency. To allow such knowledge outside their vaults would mean entire nations could forget themselves in a single generation. To allow it to remain would mean risking that someone might one day remember. The manuscript offers no clear warning, only one haunting phrase repeated across its pages, scribbled in red ink darker than the rest. Non est somnium, sed exitium. It is not dream, but undoing. And so the mirrors are hidden, the pillars walled away, the bones return to silence, yet their shadows remain. For once an image has been seen, even erased, it lingers in the mind like a scar beneath the skin. What if all humanity's forgotten ages, the empires erased, the myths cut short, the cities swallowed by desert and sea, were not accidents of time, but the work of such pillars? What if forgetting is not natural at all, but enforced? The manuscript does not only whisper of rituals and shadows. Between its pages gleam maps of the sky, charts traced in red and black ink, meticulous, undeniable. And yet, they do not belong to any heavens we know. One page shows Orion, but shifted, tilted at an angle the present sky does not hold. Another shows Sirius, not as a single blazing point, but as 3 stars bound together. The most disturbing map marks a wheel of light above the horizon, an immense constellation absent from every telescope, every modern record. Astronomers called to examine these drawings shook their heads. Some dismissed them as errors, others as imagination. But one, a Jesuit mathematician, calculated the alignments. He discovered the charts matched the sky of 10,500 BC, when the Sphinx may have first faced the rising sun, when pyramids aligned not with today's heavens, but with those of a forgotten age. If true, the manuscript remembers a sky older than history, a sky seen only by civilizations lost, their bones swallowed by flood and sand. To possess such a chart is to admit humanity's memory is shorter than the stars. The Vatican, of course, forbade such comparisons. Publicly, it once fought astronomy itself, condemned Galileo, censored star catalogs, forbade heliocentric thought. The world called it fear of heresy. But what if it was fear of memory? What if the Church's battle with the telescope was not about theology, but about concealment, to keep humanity from recognizing the sky in the manuscript? One marginal note in the forbidden text reads, "As above, so erased below," a chilling twist on the Hermetic maxim. Not only does the earth mirror heaven, but memory mirrors the stars. To erase one is to erase the other. And if the manuscript's maps are true, then Egypt, Sumer, and all we call the first civilizations were not first at all. They were inheritors. They built beneath skies, already measured, already mapped, already sanctified by those who came before. The Vatican cannot admit this, for to do so is to confess that Scripture is not the beginning, but an echo. That Genesis is not creation, but recollection. That humanity itself may be a species with amnesia, living beneath a sky we once knew, but were made to forget. Perhaps this is why the manuscript carries its curse, not to punish, but to preserve silence. For to remember the stars is to remember the world that watched them, and that the Custodes Silenti cannot allow. The stars do not change quickly. They hold memory longer than we do. But what if the sky we see now is only a fragment of the one that once existed? What if entire constellations were not merely forgotten, but erased? Deep beneath the Vatican, where tourists never walk and even priests need permission, lies a chamber colder than stone. Its walls are carved with eclipses, circles devouring circles, suns swallowed by shadow. Here the order called Ordo Obscura Eclipsi meets in silence. They are not clergy, not entirely. Some wear cassocks, others wear the robes of scholars, still others the plain suits of bureaucrats. But all share one vow: to filter memory, to decide what is carried forward and what is left behind. Their existence is denied in public, Yet traces bleed through sealed archives. A receipt for iron doors ordered in the 17th century. A list of names erased from papal registries. Margins of council documents where the phrase eclipse appears, then is blacked out. Their purpose is not simply to preserve forbidden manuscripts. It is to edit the human story, to replace dangerous memories with safer ones, to let the world believe its beginning is simple, its gods few, its rituals pure. Within their chamber, copies of the manuscript are said to rest, chained to lecterns, not studied, but guarded. For the eclipse believe knowledge is not light, but fire. Left untamed, it burns minds, burns empires, burns faith itself. And so they smother the flame with shadow. But secrecy always leaves a trace. In the 18th century, a Jesuit astronomer recorded that his star charts were confiscated after he compared them to forbidden diagrams. In the 19th century, a bishop in Milan preached of an ancient feast suspiciously similar to the Egyptian velum magnum. Days later, he was silenced, his sermons pulled from every archive. And in the 20th, scholars who spoke of proto-languages resembling the manuscript were found dead or vanished, their papers missing, their families sworn to silence. Always the same mark, a feather, black as eclipse. The eclipse believe they serve God. But which God? The one of Scripture, or the one faceless, watching from the manuscript's margins? Some argue the society does not erase to protect faith, but to serve the entities invoked by the text, the keepers of the lightless flame, the faceless ones who rise rung by rung on the ladder of light. If the manuscript is their covenant, then the eclipse are its priests. Yet not all within the Vatican agree. Some whispers say factions exist, those who believe the text must remain sealed, and those who believe it must one day be revealed, ushering humanity into memory it has long forgotten. Between them lies an endless eclipse, shadow devouring light, light devouring shadow, neither winning, neither ending. Perhaps this is why the order chose the name. An eclipse is not darkness forever. It is concealment, a pause in memory. And when it passes, the light returns, though never exactly as before. What if the eclipse do not aim to erase forever, but only to delay? To hold the memory until humanity is ready, or until it forgets completely? In the deepest pages of the manuscript, the script grows harsher. The curves sharpen into hooks, the margins drip with strokes of red, as if written not with ink, but with something heavier. Here the text abandons diagrams and chants. Here it speaks in direct warning. It calls knowledge a fire, not holy, not guiding, but stolen. Ignis feratus, the fire of theft. A flame first carried not by gods, not by angels, but by those faceless figures that haunt its pages. They are shone with torches that do not glow, flames black as ash, burning without light. One passage insists, this fire feeds not on wood, but on memory. Burn it, or it burns you. Scholars trembled at the implication. Knowledge is theft, ritual is trespass. Every revelation humanity holds, mathematics, astronomy, liturgy, stolen embers from a source we were never meant to touch. The manuscript suggests that to learn is to commit a crime against heaven itself. Yet the warnings are not consistent. Some lines beckon, climb the ladder, take the fire, forget the sun. Others condemn, the hand that steals is the hand that withers. The contradictions may not be contradictions at all, but two truths bound together. Fire illuminates, but also devours. Stories from its readers support this duality. Renaud glimpsed the fire and was consumed. Zara copied it and vanished, leaving only a symbol in blood. Father Della Croce lost prayer itself, mind erased by embers too bright to bear. Each sought light, each was burned. The Vatican fears this most of all. Not that the manuscript exists, but that its truth might echo the oldest story humanity knows, that of Prometheus, punished for giving stolen fire to man. Except here the punishment is not chains and vultures, but silence, forgetting, disappearance. And still the flame tempts, for to carry it is to wield power that bends light, halts shadow, reshapes memory. It offers dominion not over land or wealth, but over truth itself. To those who glimpse it, the danger does not outweigh the allure. For who among us does not want to know what lies beneath forgetting? The last words in the manuscript are said to be scrawled, hurried, half-burned into the final page. Ignis est memoria, et nunc arde. Memory is fire, and now it burns. Perhaps the fire was never meant to be hidden. Perhaps it was always meant to escape. The manuscript does not end. It thins, it dims, it closes like an eyelid, leaving an afterimage on whoever has looked too long. In the vault, iron, prayer, stone, it rests. Above it, bells ring, tourists drift. Candles are replaced, dust is swept, the city forgets. The book does not. It waits, it whispers, not with voice, with gravity. Rooms bend around it, memories lean toward it as filings lean toward a magnet. The Custodes silenti pass with keys and shadows. They never touch it barehanded. They never speak its name. They leave their emblem, the black feather that never burns. Silence made visible. Elsewhere, echoes remain. A chalk circle hardens in a Paris apartment no one rents. At its center, a stain refuses soap and time. In Egypt, the monks of Deir al-Byzantin light lamps at dusk and feel a draft, as if a door opens where none exists. Behind plaster, a pillar hums when the moon is thin. Under sand, mirrors drink light and give nothing back. The world continues. The edges flicker. What does the Vatican fear? Not lightning called by unclean rites. The small and unstoppable thing, memory. Not the archive, the ember. Not the page, the spark it starts in a mind. An order can seize a book. A society can wall a tomb. But who can unmake a memory once it catches? The manuscript is made for this. A language that unthreads the reader even as it threads itself into the reader. Star maps of a sky now gone, so the one who sees must carry two heavens, one above, one remembered. A ladder whose rungs are memories. To climb is to lose, and loss is illumination. It does not teach, it alters. And its echoes in the church are plain, mitres like pharaoh crowns, chalice like the cup of Ra, linen like the great shroud, water that begins a journey. The manuscript does not accuse, it exhibits. It places a mirror where an altar stands and says, "Look, do you recognize your hands?" The Ordo Obscura Eclipsi still labors below, circles within circles, minutes with no names, doors to rooms without maps. They call their delay mercy. They are not wrong. Fire saves, fire scars, yet the mirror cuts both ways. For every age they erase, another age learns to read absence. For every feather left, another rumor grows wings. Renaud walks the key in stories told by those born long after he vanished. Zara's symbol appears in a student's margin with no memory of why. Father Della Croce's skipped prayer is felt by a boy who hears it miss a beat in his grandmother's rosary. Erasure succeeds on paper. It fails again and again in people. So the manuscript waits, not for a finder, for a listener. For the one who will know that the real danger isn't in reading it, but in remembering it. Because remembering spreads. Quietly, patiently, along families, in lullabies, in the pause of a hand above a bowl of water, in the way an eye lingers on Orion and senses he is leaning wrong. What if memory itself is the stolen fire? Not a thing in a vault, but a heat passed palm to palm with no altar, no name. Ignis est memoria, et nunc ardet. Memory is fire. And now it burns. That line terrifies the keepers. That line comforts the fearful. Both are true. There is a last image the scribes seldom copy. A faceless figure, palms up, lightless flame cupped between the hands. Around it, eyes in the border do not accuse. They attend. The caption, nearly erased. Non est finis. There is no end. The fire does not choose temples. It chooses vessels. Minds that take a spark. Hearts that keep a heat no instrument can measure. You have felt it. A stranger's story lights a room you forgot you had. An old song returns, and the road smells of rain. Grief floods, and a small wick refuses to die. That is memory. That is the manuscript's truest script. And if the church stole, it also kept. It kept vigil above a flame it feared, yes. But it kept the flame. Not with swords, with silence. Not with blood, with ink. It could have burned the book and called it myth. It did not. It hid it. It kept watch. Perhaps not only for itself, perhaps also for us. Because what is hidden still leaks. It seeps through ritual, breathes through art, blinks in dreams when we face a mirror at night and sense, behind our face, a patient shape with no features. Not a monster, not a thief. A reminder. We are older than our calendars. We have climbed more rungs than we recall. The sky has turned and returned, and we with it. So listen. The vault exhales. The city settles. The monks add one more wick to one more dish of oil. Somewhere under plaster, stone cool. Somewhere under sand, glass drinks light. Somewhere a feather does not burn. Night softens the room. The window is a darker square. The air is gentle like cloth. No need to chase shadows. They are not hunters. They are curtains. They move when the world breathes. Breathe with it. In, outside. Quiet, slow. Think of the river where Renaud walked. Not the last step, the water. Reflections moving like small animals. Lamps along the quay. Footsteps far away. The city a heartbeat. The book a weight set down, for now. Think of the monastery. Sand cooling after heat. Olive leaves barely moving. A monk's hand around a clay lamp. The smallest flame. The way a corridor holds that light and does not let it fall. Think of the sky. Not tonight's alone. The older one. The Sphinx facing dawn. Orion tilted. Serious like a cluster of tiny bells. You do not have to solve it. You only have to look until looking becomes rest. Memory is not a storm. It is a hearth. It keeps you. It does not demand. It waits when you are tired. It glows when you are ready. If you forget, it forgives. If you remember, it warms. Let the questions untie themselves. Let the ladder of light be only a drawing in a closed book. Let the faceless watcher be only the quiet behind your eyes, the part that listens without fear. The vault is far away. The desert is far away. The ember is near, in your chest, under your ribs, a small, steady pulse. It is yours. It has always been. The night closes like an eyelid. The room is safe. The flame does not ask to be fed. It will wait. Sleep carries you down a gentle stair. It is not the end, only rest.